Very good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here at the Ciné Lumière at the Institut Français. I'm Dave Calhoun. Oh, excuse me. I'm Dave Calhoun from Time Out magazine, and they've kindly invited me to host this afternoon's event. Before I introduce one by one our illustrious panel, just a few words about the event. It's organised by the Society of Friends of Victor Hugo in conjunction with the Ciné Lumière, and the event is part of the 7th International Victor Hugo Festival, which opened last Saturday in London with a soup kitchen event for the homeless in the spirit of Hugo's humanitarian actions. And it continues in the coming months with many different events in France. If you are interested in learning more about the Society and the festival, please do take one of the leaflets that will be available on the way out. Or you could also speak to Andrea Beaton, who is the Vice President and UK representative of the Society. I'd like to point her out. She's down the front here. So any more information on the Society or the festival, please do speak to Andrea at the end. Welcome, all three of you. A quick introduction to our panel today. First on my left, William Nicholson. William is the screenwriter of the new film of Les Misérables, which hopefully many of you have just seen, or if not, you've seen already. William's many scripts also include Shadowlands, Gladiator, and Elizabeth the Golden Age. William's also an award-winning novelist. He's also recently written the script for Mandela, The Long Walk to Freedom, which is intriguing, but we're not here to talk about that. Coming shortly. Yeah. Who's directed that? Justin Chadwick. Who did the other Berlin Girl? Yes. William has... Oh, could you take your microphone, actually? Sorry. Thank you. William has also written a number of novels, both for adults and for children as well. Moving along, we have Hadley Fraser. Hadley is an actor and singer. He's starred in the musical of Les Misérables in 3 roles, I believe. Most recently as Javert, also before that as Marius, and before that as Grantaire as well. He also appears in the new film as an army officer as well, and we'll be speaking about that in a minute. Finally, Bradley Stevens from the University of Bristol, academic, author and specialist on Victor Hugo and adaptations of his work. Bradley, you were telling a fantastic story before we came on about how you were first turned on to the work of Victor Hugo by reading a work in a Paris cafe over one whole day. I'm going to ask you to share that very briefly with the audience because I found it intriguing.
Yes, I decided to study the 19th century as part of my studies at Cambridge, and I picked up Notre Dame de Paris, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and sat down one morning thinking I had a few hours to kill, I'll read this, and ended up spending the whole day. It was a Saturday, just sat in this cafe, completely falling in love with his writing style, so I was hooked from that moment on.
Thank you very much. So we know we have passion behind the panel today. I'm going to quickly set out the aim of this event. Our aim essentially is impossible. It's to explore the entire world of Les Misérables. We're talking about the book, of course, published in 1862 after many years of work by Victor Hugo. Then, as you'll know, a hugely revered figure in French literature, but also we're going to talk about the various adaptations it has inspired over the years, over the decades, films, TV series, plays, and of course the popular revered stage musical. That musical by Alain Boublil and Claude Michel Schomburg had a bumpy start in Paris in the early 1980s, where it didn't last very long, but the English language version, produced by Cameron Mackintosh, opened in the West End in 1985, and as we all know, has been a global hit ever since. It's the longest-running West End musical, the second longest-running West End production, full stop. It also ran on Broadway from 1987 to 2003. The film that many of you have just seen this afternoon is not in any way the first film of Les Misérables, but the important thing to say is that it is the first film of the stage musical. There have been many other films for cinema and TV, adaptations of the book involving directors as diverse as Claude Lelouch, Billy August, actors such as Gérard Depardieu, Charles Laughton, Jean Gabin, Liam Neeson, Jean-Paul Belmondo. Most of these were live action, but there have been animations. There's at least one Japanese anime as well, which I think Bradley may refer to. Most of them are in, or many of them are in French or English, but there have been Indian, Italian, Russian, other versions as well. Time and time again, filmmakers have returned to Hugo's novel, just as they perennially return to the novels of Charles Dickens or the plays of Shakespeare. To return to the film which we've just seen, as many of you will know, it's directed by Tom Hooper, whose last film, The King's Speech, was a huge hit couple of years ago. The film features movie actors in the lead roles, but it also features a number of people familiar with the musical from the stage musical, including our guest, Hadley Fraser. And among many things, it's notable in filmmaking terms for recording the voices in the scene rather than matching the image to a pre-recorded track, which is fairly unusual for filmed musicals. So before we go right back and start talking about the book, Hadley, I'd like to ask you. You were on the set of the film for a number of days as a performer. I was wondering, could you set the scene by telling us a little about the experience of shooting this film, and especially the experience of shooting this film in the way that Tom Hooper decided to shoot it? I mean, what were the challenges of recording voices in the scene, and what do you think are the benefits of it too?
Well, I suppose I'll tackle the benefits first, and I think that's predominantly the fact that you're able to lose yourself as an actor predominantly within the scene, rather than worrying about producing a performance that's perhaps recorded beforehand and then matching up that performance when you come to shoot the action itself. Doing it all live action meant that we were entirely able to respond to whatever was going on around. I don't want to get too sort of actorly about it, but you were able to lose yourself within the moment. And rather than having to follow, say, an orchestral lead from the conductor, as it would be in the stage show, we could pretty much follow what was happening within the sort of organic context of the scene at the time. And I think Tom was really, really keen from the very, very start. I mean, Bill would probably know more about this than I, but certainly in auditions, those of us who were doing the stage show at the time and then went into audition for Tom, it was a very funny experience almost, because we completely had to throw everything that we knew from the stage show out of the window in terms of that performance that one might give night in, night out on the West End stage. Good afternoon. And you had to throw an awful lot of that out of the window and then think, okay, actually, what am I saying? And if the camera is this close to me, 6 inches from my face, how does that then alter how I'm going to sing, or I suppose more specifically, act while singing? How does that alter the nature of the way that I then do that? When we came to do it on set, I suppose, the big difficulty was obviously the fact that you can't sort of have a 30-piece orchestra off camera. So we had tiny little earpiece in one ear. And we'd have a little chap in the corner playing on a piano. But of course, there were moments, especially in the scenes that I participated in, where you've got cannon firing off all over the place and people firing rifles at you and shouting. You know, you can't really hear a piano very well. So if there are moments in the film where it looks like people are sort of slightly not unsure of what's happening, that might well be it. Not really, no, it's all very... It was thrilling, actually, absolutely thrilling to de-theatricalise it to a certain extent and say, okay, the words that we've got just happen to be set to music rather than the other way around.
Thank you. Well, William Nicholson, to bring you in and go back a bit further in time with the story of the film, presumably this is an unusual commission for you. I mean, not only you're being charged with turning a stage musical into a film musical, but presumably you're also being charged with preserving as much of the spirit and the detail of that musical. Because unlike, I mean, there may be many adaptations of Les Misérables, and unlike other adaptations of films where authors can put their own stamp on it, this is the fan base and the audience are very, very close to this. So presumably there's there's adaptation and preservation which you had to do.
Yes, I mean, this had a long history of attempts to turn the show into a movie. Cameron Mackintosh had given it to Alan Parker originally to turn it into a movie, and he struggled for a while and gave up, and Bruce Beresford had a go. A couple of directors in modern times whose names I've not been given, but apparently have had a go. And when it came to the production company working title, they said to Cameron, did it ever occur to you to get a screenwriter on the job? Because the normal procedure is that we don't start with a director, we start with a script. This is a secret that the industry keeps from the public at large, but in fact there are these things called scripts. And So Working Title said, we will put a writer onto it. And they came to me and said, did I know the show? And I did know the show. I'd seen it by then, I suppose, 4 times in its history. I'm a great fan. And I said, I'd absolutely love to do it, and my job is not to screw it up. Now, I'm adapting the show. I am not adapting the book. I'm not even adapting the show. I'm taking the show and retaining every single bit of its brilliance that I can, but it's going to be a movie, and that really is very different. So the brief that I gave myself was to retain, as you say, the fan base, for the very good reason that this is a great piece of work, but secondly, to solve some of the problems that the show has, which those of you who've seen the show on stage may not even have noticed, but it's actually got a lot of storytelling problems. So those were the twin problems that I had to solve.
Did you feel that there were certain things you can get away with the stage musical, which once they're put there on the glare of the cinema screen, they would become problems? And that was part of your job, to identify those possible problems, find a solution. Yes,
I mean, as Hadley was saying, when the camera is up close, you can't get away with stuff. When you've got a large crowd of people on a stage some way away from an audience, you can sweep them through with the power of the music. Once you pick it apart and start going into the individual characters, the narrative problems start to emerge. And there are actually some quite grave narrative problems in the show, and we did our best to solve them, but there was a limit to what we could do because we wanted to stick with the musical flow. We did actually reorder several of the songs, which a lot of people don't realize. We also dropped a song, but on the whole we wanted to be faithful.
I mean, you say your job was to adapt the stage musical rather than adapting the book, but what role did the book have in the process? I mean, did you go to the book to solve any of those problems?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you see, if you have, as I say, narrative problems, character development problems, rather than inventing a solution, you think to yourself, actually, somebody else worked on this before, called Victor Hugo. Why don't we go back and see how he solved these problems? And of course you go back to the book and you find all the answers are there. So it's just a matter of finding a few little threads of the million threads that he put into the book and inserting them in the show. There's not a great deal, but there is some. We didn't really invent anything. We added from the book into the show.
Thank you. I think in a second we'll go back and I'm going to ask you to talk about maybe some specific problems which you solved and things you brought to your script. But Bradley, to bring you in, I'd like to go right back there. The novel was published in 1862. I'd like to talk a little bit about, to give some context to the publication of the book, its reception, and then move on to talk about other adaptations there have been. But firstly, when the book was published in 1862, what was the reception to it at the time?
Well, the popular reception was massive. It was a true phenomenon. It had been backed by a major publicity campaign by Hugo's Belgian editors, and it was billed as the greatest literary work of the century. Any new work from Hugo was going to raise an enormous amount of attention because he was in political exile at the time and had become an icon of Republican values. Of course, the novel's published 1862. We're only 1 year after Italian unification, 1 year after the outbreak of the American Civil War. So there was a sense that a liberal spirit had been galvanized in a lot of Western countries. When the novel was released in stages in the spring of 1862, readers lapped it up. The stories of bookstores with queues around the block, people waiting since 5 or 6 in the morning for the next instalment, and readers absolutely adored this story. The critics were mixed. There was a split that's been noted by various specialists between more conservative thinkers who felt that this novel was too grandiose, took itself too seriously, and also was manipulating readers emotionally. The liberal thinkers at the time, or the liberal press, if you want to call it that, were more receptive, but still identified various flaws in the novel, not least this idea that it was something quite organic and sprawling, and didn't necessarily have the coherence they might expect from some other authors. So as ever, the public absolutely loved it, the critics weren't so sure.
In retrospect, what would you say Hugo was setting out to achieve? It's a huge question, but was setting out to achieve with this novel, and what were his, looking back at it now, what do you think were his overarching preoccupations?
Well, there's a preface at the very beginning of the novel, which some adaptations actually use as their first frame on film, where Hugo says, as long as there's ignorance and misery on this world, then books of this kind may not be useless. So he's clearly wanting to prompt and indeed prick our consciences, both as human beings and how we can be better human beings towards one another, but also as social citizens. So it's got this personal message, what would you do in these situations, how would you act? But it also has a very clear political message. The 19th century is the century of democracy. This is the march of history, and you're either on the right side of that or the wrong side. And these are the conundrums, these are the dilemmas you have to face. You have to embark on this road to redemption in the same way that Valjean does, in many respects.
And obviously, real places, events, social conditions form the backdrop to this novel. Events such as the 1832 uprising. But is there any evidence that Hugo was basing his principal characters on any real people?
Yeah, there is. There's various biographical strands you can trace through the novel itself. So Valjean is said to be based on a criminal mastermind known as Vidocq. I say mastermind, but this is the cliché we've now inherited. Marius is very much based on Hugo's own experience as a student in poverty when he was beginning to study law in his early 20s. And so the wedding date for Marius and Cosette is the same date that Hugo and his long-term mistress come together. So there's a number of biographical details you can identify in the text. In terms of key characters coming in, or key figures from public life, not so much, aside from the digressions to the king, Louis-Philippe, who he knew personally at the time.
And General Lamarck.
And General Lamarck with his death in 1832. So the insurrection itself is a real event, also the Battle of Waterloo. In terms of real characters actually working in the narrative, no, it's not a case of taking true life and transferring it. He drew on his own experiences, of course, but wasn't trying to copy anything.
Now, let's move on to talk about the realm of adaptations. You've done a lot of work on adaptations of the novel, but we'll move on to talk about cinema's treatment of the novel. But I wonder if you could just fill in about pre-cinema. There was, I believe, the first adaptation of the novel was a stage adaptation by Hugo's own son, Charles.
Yeah, Charles in 1863 in Brussels. So Charles and the family friend Paul Maurice adapt Les Misérables into a theatrical production just a year after the novel's been published. And this is staged in Brussels because Hugo is still in exile from France at the time. And this is seen to be the very first adaptation. It depends how you interpret adaptation. Gustave Briand's illustrations of the characters, which, if you look at them now, quite resemble the character posters used in the advertising for the movie. Yeah. They were produced within a month of the first volumes coming out. So right up until the Lumière brothers, who patented cinematography, when they do their 90-second film of Victor Hugo and the main characters of Les Misérables, you get this history of stage adaptations, reading groups and recitals, one-man acts. Scottish actor Norman McKinley did a production called The Bishop's Candlesticks. Benoit Coquelin, I think his name was, did a one-man show looking at scenes with Jean Valjean in Paris. So there's this urge amongst the public, but also artists, to bring Les Misérables into different forms and contexts.
And the relationship between Valjean and Javert, obviously, is the backbone of the stage musical, the backbone of many of the film adaptations, and is the backbone of this new film. Was that dynamic central to thinking to some of the earlier adaptations which you're aware of? Was that dynamic central to those? Was it something that was heightened very early on in adaptations, or did any of those adaptations go in very different directions or take very different focuses?
No, Valjean was certainly the focus, and that rivalry with Javert became a key preoccupation of many of these adaptations. I think looking at the narrative structure of Les Misérables, if you're going to focus on Valjean as your protagonist, then you have to give an awful lot of traffic to that relationship with Javert. It's crucial. I think seeing the way in which Javert does not always come across as the villain, though, it's quite key. Now there's this cliche that he's this man in black, this ruthless cop, this badass inspector, as some critics have called him in the recent reviews. And of course, he's not the villain, he's not the antagonist. That's more the Thénardier's role. So it's looking at the dynamic as two flip sides. Javert, I think Hugo calls him, he's all that is good about evil, because he's so single-minded. And so there's an awful lot of dignity and nobility to the character that you notice in these early adaptations.
Now, I think you quoted earlier, and I've read it elsewhere, that there are probably about 60 so adaptations. Yeah. That figure, is that referring to film and television adaptations, or is that including theatre?
No, that's just including that's just film and television adaptations. There's over 60, we estimate, and from all over the world: Russia, Mexico, Brazil, India, Egypt. I think there's a production at the moment ongoing in Morocco, resetting Les Misérables in the context of the 1920s Moroccan rebellion. So I think there's this massive wealth of cinematic and filmic responses to the novel. And
it's obviously impossible for us to go through all these 60 adaptations here today, but I was wondering whether of the ones you're aware of that you've watched, which of them for you, rise above the pack for various reasons, really? Maybe for reasons of quality, or for reasons of the fact they're particularly esoteric, or the terrible failures, maybe.
There's two that immediately spring to mind. There's a 1934 French film of Les Misérables by Raymond Bernard, which is nearly 5 hours long, so you need to be prepared for that running length. But that is, it channels this incredibly expressionistic vision, so tilted camera angles, lighting, great use of space. It's a wonderfully sweeping version. The other version that always comes to my mind is Claude Lelouch's 1995 version of Les Misérables, which not only retells the story within the context of the Second World War and the Nazi occupation of France, but actually plays with the whole process of adaptation. The characters talk about the novel. The central hero notes the parallels between his life and Valjean's and the other characters. And it's this wonderful statement about how we continually return to stories that not only bring us pleasure, but also help us understand new experiences.
William, coming back to you, so we're talking here about this long line of adaptations, but I guess with the caveat which we introduced at the beginning is that your film, the new film, is the only film of the musical. But did you feel you were in a long line of adapters, or because your source was the musical, was it year zero for you in terms of cinematic?
It was
versions?
year zero.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any of these versions, nor would it be helpful to do so. I was working from the show that was my primary source, my only source, backed up by Hugo.
So going back to what we were saying before, you said that you felt that one of your primary roles was to identify certain. You had the musical, you want to transfer it to screen, but identify certain problems that needed solving. I wonder whether if you could give us an example of one particular scene or sequence where you really felt there had to be significant changes made for it to work on screen.
Sure. If you're familiar with either the film or the show, you'll know that when we move from the opening sequences into Montreuil, the little town where Valjean is going to appear suddenly and mysteriously as a wealthy benefactor and a mayor. In the stage show, what happens is we get to the factory, we discover that Valjean is rich and successful and good. Javert mysteriously turns up, and we're not quite sure why. And Fantine runs foul of the foreman and is expelled, and Valjean fails to save her from being expelled by inadvertence. He's not paying attention when she's kicked out. In the stage show, what then happens is he's so smitten with guilt over this that he vows to take on Cosette, and this determines the entire rest of the story. We all felt that this was weak, that he didn't have enough motivation to make such a major change. We were also concerned about the appearance of Javert and its coincidental quality. So what we did was, and this doesn't happen in the show, as you leave the French mountain village where he tears up his ticket of leave, what you come to next is not the workers in the factory as in the stage show. You come to Javert, and he's thundering on a horse across the countryside, and he's heading somewhere. And so we're now with Javert. So it's Javert who is taking us to Montreuil rather than Valjean, which is a switch around. When we arrive there, we realize that Javert is going to go and meet the mayor in the mayor's factory. So all the coincidence is removed. But something important now happens. It is as Javert enters that the fracas happens with Fantine and the foreman. Valjean, who would, we presume, otherwise have been in control and would have said, sort this out, but don't sack her, we don't do that kind of thing, suddenly sees Javert and he freezes in the middle of a statement. And that freezing causes Fantine's fate to follow. The foreman kicks her out. He's frozen because he's terrified of being discovered. Subsequently, and there's a new scene that follows, which is not in the show, between Javert and Valjean. Subsequently, when he meets her in the red light district, he realizes that it was his own fear of being discovered, his own looking after his own skin, that caused her to be thrown into the gutter. And that is a much, much stronger psychological motive for the burden he takes on. Now, if you watch the film, if you watch the show, you'd probably never notice any of this, but I would hope that a little bump that you might otherwise have felt, you might have thought, this guy Valjean is a bit super scrupulous, you know? that we've ironed that out. That's just one example. We did that several times with several character motivational points.
On a more general note, I'm curious to know, when you took this on, did you go and sit through the show several times with your notebook, noting down, coming away, thinking about certain approaches, certain overarching things? How many times did you sit through the show knowing you were going to adapt it?
I saw it in London after I knew I was going to adapt it. I was then asked to go and see it in Manchester because a different version at that time had been created by Cameron Mackintosh, a slightly speeded up, slightly stripped down version. So I saw that version as well. It wasn't that different. After that, I worked with a DVD of a concert performance of it, and that was what I kept going back to check, because it's terribly important to get the emotional colouring right. You can't go introducing new scenes that don't flow into a very high emotional point. So I used there isn't a DVD of the show, but there was a DVD of a concert performance of it, and that became my kind of template.
What flexibility did you have with the lyrics, with the sung lines? I mean,
total flexibility. The team who I met before I even started work, I said, how far can I go? And this is Claude Michel and Alain and Cameron. They said, do anything. We want this film to work. We don't care. When we were working on this back in the early 80s, we threw everything up in the air time and time again. We're willing to do all that again, which amazed me. It was me who was saying, I don't want to do that. This has a fan base. I want as much as possible to stick with it. But they were up for anything. And my original screenplay had small but repeated dialogue scenes interpolated all the way through. It was when Tom Hooper, the director, came on board with my script, which brought him on board, and he said, we're going to take these dialogue scenes and we're going to sing them. So I then had to translate the dialogue scenes into lyrics, which matched the tunes, because basically each character has a tune. My lyrics, and this is the insanity of this kind of process, my lyrics were then translated by Alain Boublil into French. He then, having translated them to French in order to work on them, translated them back into English in his own way, sent them to Herbie Kretzmer, the lyricist, who then rewrote them in his way, and those are the lyrics that are in the show. So I don't have any lyrics in the show at all. I'd be a lot richer than I am now if I did. But I created, as it were, the content of those lyrics.
I see, okay. So you said, I know you were on board writing the script for a while before Tom Hooper, the director, came on board, and obviously he had very specific ideas, which you've hinted at there, which took the film in the direction in which it went. Once he came on board, did you the conversations you had together? What knock-on effect did they have on your work? And what did he say to you actually? What did Tom, when Tom Hooper said, I'm doing this, what did he say when this is my overarching vision, this is how I want to make this film?
I should say that I was working with Tom on another project before this, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm writing the screenplay for Les Misérables. And he said, that's interesting. And he went away and he saw it, and he's told his agent, I want to do this.
Yeah.
And so he and I already knew, but we had history together on this.
Is this an unproduced script? Or
it's Mandela.
Oh, it's the
Mandela.
Mandela. Oh, it's
yes,
Mandela.
he was going to be the director on it, and he dropped off Mandela to do this.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to wait for him, so we have another director. The Mandela film is going to be sensational, coming in September. Yeah. So Tom came on board.
Who's playing Mandela?
Idris Elba.
Idris
Yes.
Elba, yeah.
Tom came on board. I'd been on it 18 months when Tom came on board.
Yes.
But he was absolutely critical. First of all, he said, we're going to sing every word. Secondly, he said, we're going to sing it live, which was a crucial thing. But thirdly, he got stuck into the way the story was being told, and we started reworking it yet again. So he played an enormous role.
Hadley, talking here about the finished film as it is, actually, someone who knows the musical very, very well. I mean, you've been in it. What do you think about the balance that I certainly think Tom Hooper has achieved between the intimacy, which William is talking about here? I mean, there's some fantastic close-ups that there are throughout the film, but also the sense of scale, the sense of the epic, which is certainly in there as well. But also, I think he's managed to keep in a real sense of the stage musical as well. It's not. It's there is a sense of it, of its heritage, I think, within there, and there's a very fine balance, I think, between the two, that realist intimacy and that sense of its provenance. I mean, I wonder if you felt that when you finally, obviously you were involved in the shooting of it, when you finally sat and watched it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that sort of epic nature of the story and of the show as well, I think. It is almost perfect for musical adaptation, and the reason, or part of the reason, I suppose, why it's so popular is as a stage performer, very often we're told to hit the back wall, which means that when you're on stage, you have to translate your emotion to the person sitting in the back row in the upper circle, who's in the nosebleed seats, and what Les Mis does very well, both. I suppose originally within the musical adaptation, is give a sense of that hitting the back wall, as well as understanding the internal life of each character. And I think credit to Tom and obviously to Bill as well, in terms of translating that across onto the film. There is a sense of hitting the back wall. I'm using this actorly phrase, forgive me. There's a sense of that. But also, I suppose, what film then is able to do even further is to suggest or to give a conduit right into the eyes, and you're able to understand the internal life set against that.
So something I want to ask all three of you, but Hadley, I'll begin with you, because you have this experience of knowing the show very well and being in the film, and I was talking about the film there as a viewer. I mean, here we have this novel story set in the 19th century, full of specific historical detail, and yet its adaptations and especially the new film and the stage musical resonate so strongly and emotionally with audiences. Having been involved with it for so long, have you come to any conclusions as to why? I mean, why does it connect so strongly with audiences?
I think over and above the fact, and I'm no expert about Hugo's story. I'll leave that to Bradley, I suppose. I think the success of the musical is down to Claude Michel's score, which is an incredible piece of music writing. And it's the combination, I suppose, of Hugo's story added to Claude Michel's extraordinary piece of music writing that I think speaks to people on whatever level. We all know the reason why we keep coming back to Les Mis if you're one of those if you're one of those people. There have been other shows, and I've been involved with them, that Claude Michel has written. And this is the same composer, pretty much ostensibly writing similar music that haven't worked as well. What do we put that down to? Maybe it's just the combination of Hugo plus Claude Michel's extraordinary score. I mean, he talks a lot about Michel Legrand being a big inspiration of his. These songs that keep on going and keep on going. And not in a way that makes you want to stop listening to them, but that actually, musically speaking, they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow. And I think that's what happens with people's emotions, that they grow and grow and grow along with these characters when they sing this extraordinary music. I'm waffling.
No, not at all. No.
Sorry, I'm being very actorly.
No, not at all. Bradley, if I could put that same question to you, maybe taking the long view, including the reception of the book as well, actually, and how that connects with why modern audiences...
I mean, it's a question that many of us who work on the subject are often asked. Why Les Misérables? Why not one of the other big 19th century novels? And why has it lent itself so well to adaptation? I think, talking about it from the literary point of view, I think there's a number of factors. Certainly Hugo's visual imagination, the attention to detail that he brings, that gives so much scope for artists willing to play around with text and think about how they can translate into different media. I think we can't underestimate the use of character. Hugo is a master of creating these archetypal figures. So Jean Valjean is the everyman, Fantine the self-sacrificing mother, Javert the single-minded servant of authority, Gavroche the precocious child, Marius the idealist, young revolutionary. So there are a number of characters who translate very easily across not only time but also cultures, and I think that connects with an awful lot of readers. Beyond that, I think that the ways in which Hugo knows how to both plough certain human emotions, compassion, pity, anger, impatience, both through the characters, but also as readers, when you're reading this thing, just as things get heated up, for example, with Valjean taking Marius down into the sewers, suddenly we get a history of the sewers, as if to go, well, you can all breathe a little bit now as I let you off the hook, but you become more impatient as a reader to find out more. But it's those emotions as readers as well that are prompted by our reading of the text, and I think that speaks to people now. And he was very self-conscious when he wrote this. He knew that he wanted the novel to be of his time, so to speak to the 19th century, but also to echo those great classical writers that he adored, like Homer, who had managed to continue to speak to different generations. And again, looking forward to how society was developing in the 19th century, increasingly capitalized, increasingly commercialized, increasingly industrialized. The social cost of what happened to this class, or this unclassed sector of society that society simply wanted to brush away.
William, the same question to you. I mean, when you decided to take it on, obviously you knew you were hoping to bring the fan base and more of the musical to the film, but you must have also had to think, why do modern audiences, why will modern audiences want to watch this? Why hopefully, will it move them?
Well, I mean, I answer that question by answering why it moved me. Sure. And I think that's the important thing. You don't get involved with this kind of project unless you are yourself very moved by it. I was very moved by it, and for me, there's a very simple answer. This is a drama of moral emotion. There are very few of these things around. People are quite sneery about the idea of moral emotion. They're frightened that they're going to get preached at. Anything that has goodness and God in it scares a modern creative person, I think quite wrongly. I think there's a massive audience out there that's hungry for dramatizing the moral struggle. And the moral struggle is, very simply, the struggle to be good in a bad world. And Hugo understood that completely, and that's what happens when you come out of Les Mis, despite the fact that it's in some senses a tragedy. You come out feeling that the aspiration to do better, to make a just world, to be a good man, which is Valjean's journey, is possible. And it elevates you in a way that does not happen in Phantom of the Opera, for example, the other very successful Cameron Mackintosh piece, where all that you're being manipulated about is your love emotions. This is something much, much bigger. And I believe people are very idealistic. I don't buy the idea that we've all become cynical and that we've all given up. On the contrary, we're all longing for there to be some way to make the world better. Hugo passionately believed that, put it into his book, and it's come through loud and clear in the show and in the film.
Thank you. Hadley, coming back to you, one thing I wanted to ask in terms of your own relationship with the musical and the book. When you, as we said, you played 3 roles, culminating in Javert, who you were playing while shooting the film. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what role the book had in your own preparation, because I'm second guessing your answer, because we were talking about this before. You were saying that you felt going back to the book gave you a new, you were able to bring a new depth to your work in the musical. I wonder if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I suppose when I found out that I was playing the role, I was conscious that there was a stereotype of people who were cast within the role, and that I was possibly on the young side, and very often the people who are cast as Javert are quite large, and I don't know if any of you have seen the 25th anniversary concert that I think Bill was referring to, but Norm Lewis, who plays Javert, is about 8'9" and built like a mahogany tree, So I thought, well, I'm not exactly that guy, so how am I going to find sort of Javert that my Javert, I suppose? And the way to do that, I think, for me, was to head back to the book and to see what I could draw out of this man and this character. And I suppose the things that appealed to me the most was, as Bradley touched on, was not making him the baddie. Was making him an equal of Valjean in many ways, and not excusing his sort of moral, his sort of very strict moral guideline, but by the same token, trying to understand it. It's quite a difficult thing, I suppose, perhaps for someone of our generation to understand. And there are problems, I suppose, that I encountered, as in suddenly finding a reason to commit suicide. That was something that I really, really struggled with. So again, I went back to the book and tried to piece together why suddenly this man who was so right and believed in himself so much, why by being proved wrong and someone showing him compassion, was he then able to go and to kill himself? There's one thing I will say, I suppose, is that when you're tackling a new show, you're able to delve into this stuff a little bit more in greater detail. When you take over a role that's already been done before, an awful lot of that work is down to you to do yourself. Rehearsing for the West End production, you might have 3 or 4 weeks. Most of that is taken up in terms of you stand there, you sing after that gunshot, and make sure you don't miss your lighting cue. So there will be actors out there who possibly don't return to the book, and that's, I suppose, perfectly valid. And the musical, I suppose, is its own entity now, and people will look to be inspired by their take on the character in pure terms of what happens in the musical. But for me, it was very much a question of going back to the novel and thinking, okay, who's this guy in the novel, and how do I put him on stage?
Thank you. One final question there, actually. As someone so closely involved with the stage musical, did you fear in any way the fact the film was being made? Were you nervous about it coming to cinema screens, or did you just see it as an opportunity?
Well, yeah, I suppose so. My agent certainly did.
Fear or see it as an opportunity?
No, I think I speak for the sort of theatrical community and those people who have been involved in the stage show of Les Mis down the years. I mean, we were all sort of crying out for it to a certain extent, and also I think crying out to almost validate the musical. And it's so great listening to what Bill was saying about people being, proving people wrong about being connected to moral emotion, and I think from our point of view, we were very, very keen for this wonderful show to be seen by people on film who might not otherwise be able to see it, because we love doing it.
I'm going to start taking questions from the audience in a second, so please do think of anything you'd like to ask anyone up here on the panel about anything we've been talking about, and there will be a microphone going around. Before we do that, talking about the musical there, we'll be talking about the film. I'd like to ask to end our bit of the discussion on the book, Bradley. I mean, you work in a university context, you work with students of French literature. It is a huge book. It's a huge, unwieldy, discursive. I mean, the story which people are familiar with from the stage musical and from this new film is part of it, but there are huge diversions on, which go on for many, 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 many pages on various subjects. Battle of Waterloo, French slang of the time, argot of the time. Is it difficult to get students, to get readers to the book in your context?
With students,
and not just in a PhD.
With students, it's easier because you say to them, "You've got to do this, otherwise you're not passing the course." You've got a little bit more control. I do find, though, sometimes we underestimate people who choose to, say, study literature or culture at university, thinking, they can't take these big books, particularly in an age of, some people call this the age of abridgment, so, Twitter feeds and Facebook and sound bites for news headlines. And in fact, viewing habits are changing. It doesn't mean that attention spans are shortening, or indeed that the interest in this kind of story, as Bill was saying, has dwindled in any way. So I actually find with the students I've had the pleasure of teaching, both at Bristol but also Cambridge and over in the States, that they are completely in love with this story, and they love it as readers, but they adore it as critics as well. They really sink their teeth into it. I think in terms of the book itself, for the general readership, I think people come to the book through different adaptations now. So people will see the musical and will want to read the text. Whether they read the entire thing, I don't know. I think more research would need to be done in that respect. But something you do notice is with something like Les Misérables as a text, the digressions for a modern reader, you can, if you wish to, skip them. That doesn't mean you're going to get the complete picture of Les Misérables, but you will still get quite a clear picture. And the joy of reading Hugo is that, certainly with some of his poetry collections, but really across the entire oeuvre, is that you can dip into just a couple of pages and you get the entire picture. So he used to talk about one drop of the ocean is, of course, the ocean entire. It's the same DNA, it's the same composition. So I think it's just looking at how different readers come to this text and what they do with it. I think the enjoyment is still there, very much so.
William, people often talk about the unfilmable novel. Sometimes it's proven not to be true, but surely this novel in its entirety is unfilmable, or would you disagree? Would you say that adaptation is sometimes about the spirit of rather than the detail of?
Well, what I would say is I'd like to pay tribute to the group of Royal Shakespeare Company talents who forged the show out of the book. Trevor Nunn, John Caird, James Fenton, not that he's RSC, Cameron McIntosh. They took them a long time, and it was very difficult. I didn't have to do any of that work. It had been done, and it's very, very difficult. If you read the novel is massive. It's got endless plot connections which are not in the show and not in the film. And I really take my hat off to those people. Now, they did it in a workshop context, which is, I think, almost the only way you could do it. They kept on trying different ways. Bits of plot were in and were out. Different songs came and went. They were demanding the writing of new songs right up to the time that it was going to be performed in front of an audience. And I think that's almost the only way it could have been done.
Thank you. I'm going to start taking questions from the audience, please. As I say, there is a microphone going around. Would anyone like to begin the questioning? There is. If I could set up a few questions, it would be more efficient. So there is one down here. Are there any others I can come to afterwards? There's one in the middle, then one right at the back. So we'll go there, then we'll go there. Please.
Well, first of all, very interested to hear you're doing the Mandela film, because I've known about this for years and years and years, and it's never happened, and it's great.
I've been writing it for years and years.
Another huge book as well, actually.
I knew Anand Singh was very keen on it for years and years and years. But interestingly, picking up what everybody said about why it appeals, when I first saw it, I'm South African, and immediately I thought, we should do this set in South Africa, because it is absolutely... I came to England in the 60s. It was what I'd left in South Africa. And I thought, I want a black Les Misérables. and I can see why, talking the way you have about how you felt about Misérables, that you've brought that same thing to Mandela, and thank you. But what I really wanted to ask was about the Thénardiers. Because picking up what you said, Bradley, about the evil which is lodged in the Thénardiers, and in the stage productions I've seen, particularly when Alan Armstrong was playing Thénardier, this came across so strongly. This is an evil, evil man. He plays the bluff host. He's got some very funny lines, but he's a vicious sod, and you know that he will kill people. And the film lost this for me completely. I mean, here were a couple of grotesques. The Thénardier and Madame Thénardier, who bore no relation to the Thénardiers I knew. And the only thing I thought was really superb was the way Éponine, the little Éponine, was brought in to the early sequences with the Thénardiers, because it fed into the big Éponine, and it gave some sort of connection with her upbringing, because in the show she disappears completely. You know, she's just there on a table in a pretty bonnet. And she works beautifully as a child. But the Thénardiers, I thought, they didn't balance the other side.
Well, maybe if I just put that to William, yeah. What were your thoughts about how to present the Thénardiers in this film version?
The Thénardiers are usually used as comic relief in the show. Their songs are jolly, they're fun. It gives you a breather from the somewhat relentless misery of the rest of it. And they perform a very necessary emotional pacing function. I had always seen, Bradley spoke of the Thénardiers as the antagonists. I have not seen that. It seems to me the antagonists are the power structure, the invisible power structure of the wealthy people who are exploiting the poor. Not Javert, I quite agree. And that the Thénardiers represent the kind of chancers who survive whatever you do. And in my original script, I wanted at the end, when you see the successful revolution at the end, to end as the march goes by, and there are the Thénardiers, and I wanted Monsieur Thénardier to turn and wink at camera, as if to say, villains like us go on forever. I don't agree with you that they are the ultimate villains, but then I didn't see the Alan Armstrong performance, and maybe if I had done, I would have done.
Not just the Alan Armstrong, though. I think the actor's name is Ashley Artis, and he portrayed Thénardier in the national tour in 2010, and I can't remember the actress's name. But again, what they brought to those two roles was a sense of comic relief, but of dark comedy. And bordering on a sociopathic identity in both cases. I think with the Thénardiers, I can see your point about the social structure, and indeed they are a product of this structure. And I think Hugo's main target is certainly the anonymous power structure, and sometimes you see that vocalized through various bourgeois characters in the novel. But Thénardier makes choices, and he makes dark choices. Not least at the end when Marius pays him off, and what happens? He becomes a slave trader in New York. That's the persistence of evil, as he buys into this new industry. So I think he's more than just a chancer. I think he's calculating, he's conniving, and he has an intelligence that's underestimated by those higher up. And I think for the characters to truly play their full role in the story, there does need to be that edge to them. So I would agree with you, actually.
Just to pick up on the questioner's first comment about how she can imagine a South African version of the story, I'm wondering if through your research into various adaptations, are there any particular examples where some very interesting local contexts have been brought to a film within the society, the country where the adaptation's been written and made?
I think whenever an adaptation's made, you're not just simply adapting the source, you're shaped by the context in which you're working. So there was an American film in 1935, the one with Charles Laughton actually, directed by Richard Boleslavsky, with Frederick March and Jean Valjean, and there are constant references to the 30s Depression. So Valjean's prison number is changed from 24601 to 2906, and his friends are 2910, 2911. So there's this constant reference to 1929, and he talks in language that would connect very much with those workers of the Dust Bowl migration in the 30s. Likewise, the Egyptian adaptations, which I've only ever been able to look at through clips rather than in their entirety, but seem to speak to an Egyptian cultural context. So I think whenever you're adapting something, you're always thinking about audience, about your times, and again, about what the story means to you. I think it has this effect. It forces you to ask yourself, what does this mean to me? How would I respond? And in doing that, you're automatically connecting with, your own surroundings, your own society, but also your own family, your own biography. As you were saying, Hadley, with Javert, what can I do with this role based on what I know emotionally and intellectually?
Thank you. Next question was, if you could throw your hand up again, please. Yes, there. Thank you. If you could just wait for the microphone, please. And then the next question will be at the back. If you could throw your hand up. Is there another question I can set up? No. Oh, yes, there.
Well, we know that something that has made Les Misérables so epic. Another thing is the revolutionary student at the barricade. So what do you think the role of the revolution has played in the novel and the production of the musical, and as well as, more importantly, the film? And as well, this is for Hadley, but I know you have played both sides of the revolution, like the army officer and grandchild. How do you think that would help you to perceive the revolution from both sides? And what do you think what kind of spirit do you think is brought by those students? And do you think they are compatible with what is embodied in the emotional struggle or moral struggle of Valjean and Javert?
I guess I'll talk about the revolutionaries and the students first. There's two things that immediately spring to mind, and this was one of the things that, as a viewer of the film, I felt that Bill and Tom had really nailed, and that was the sense of the historic context of the film that doesn't necessarily come across as strongly, I think, in the stage show, for various reasons. Perhaps you're unable to suggest the epic nature of what was going on. And so I think I understood a great deal more about why the students were fighting for what they were fighting for. Whereas within the context of the stage show, sometimes it's just pretty boys with guns who've got nice voices, and you're not necessarily sure what they're fighting for. I think that the thing that Tom impressed upon us while we were filming, specifically for myself, who ends up shooting Enjolras. You know what shooting is. I don't need to do the hand movement. Tom was fascinating to listen to, because he said he brought Aaron and myself together, Aaron who played Enjolras, and said, look, here's the thing. Yes, Aaron, you're the leader of the students, and Hadley, you're the leader of the National Guard. But I want you to think about it in the context that it's very probable that the two of you might have grown up in the same quarter, in the same street. You've known one another since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. So, he really wanted to imbue a certain sense of the fact that the people who are involved in these events are very, very real people. And it's a sort of heartbreaking coming together of duty and emotion, certainly for myself in that instance of thinking, well, this might have been a guy who I've grown up with, and now suddenly, because I just happen to be wearing this uniform, and you don't happen to be wearing one, I've been given the orders to shoot you. I suppose that's just a sort of microcosm of what's happening throughout the entire story. Does that make sense? Yeah.
If I can just pick up very quickly on
Sure.
that, in the novel, Hugo describes the revolution very much as a war between brothers. It's a civil war, and there's a tragedy involved in that links back into the injustices of the social system. And this, I think, pricking your moral consciousness as a reader to see Javert and Valjean, who are very much flip sides. Remember, Javert is born to a fortune-teller mother and a galley prisoner father, so he's one of the Misérables class as well in many respects. And then with the students and the authorities, you have to have that sense of loss, that sense of missed opportunity, and this is what Hugo really wants to convey in that idea of brother against brother.
Thank you. There's a question up the back there, please, and then we'll come down here.
Hi, good evening, afternoon, sorry. For someone who knows very little about Victor Hugo, which book would you suggest in English to start off with, please?
It's probably a question for Bradley.
Well, the most translated, aside from Les Misérables, is The Hunchback of Notre Dame, or Notre Dame de Paris, which is my first love with his work, so that would be the one I would recommend. Again, for its picture of society, for its picture of those who are disadvantaged, but also for its exploration of moral dilemma, and the human responses within certain social structures, not least the response of the hero of the priest Claude Frollo within the church. He becomes an antagonist. I shouldn't say hero, but there are people who think he's a hero. Aside from that, it depends on the translations. It's true that there are English translations of his other novels, but there aren't many translations of his plays, and his poetry is translated in bits and bobs rather than in complete works. So this is a plug, if there are any translators in the audience, to do a bit more work, if we could, to spread the word to those who don't read French.
You can follow Bradley's example and read Notre Dame de Paris all in one day in a Parisian cafe.
Need a lot of caffeine.
And cigarettes, I think you said, but if that's your taste. There was another question. Well, I will come down here, but there's another question near the questioner there. So just for ease of microphone movement, if we could take that one, then we'll come here. Thank you.
I just wanted to. I don't know how much insight you had into the casting process, but obviously when it first came to the stage, most of the main characters were relatively unknown. Do you think it was an asset to the film that there was such there was an all-star cast, or was there actually a risk in that there wouldn't be as much of an emotional connection because it was, very much a blockbuster?
If you maybe you could talk on behalf of the production there from
Sure,
that basis.
Yes. You're quite right. I think that was an important decision. Of course, this was entirely Tom Hooper's decision. The point about casting big names is commercial. You can guarantee a certain amount of business with big names that you can't guarantee without. And the film is now a huge success, but nobody knew that. You have to protect yourself against the downside. So if you're Universal Studios who are bankrolling this, it helps a lot to have at least some star names. So that's just a commercial reality. On the question of did it help or hurt, Tom, I think, did something rather brilliant. He determined to go with big names, but he auditioned every single one of them. It wasn't a matter of saying, Russell Crowe, you're very famous, would you grace us with your performance? It was, if you want this, come in and sing, and we're going to see if you're good enough, and if you're not going to get it. And he trained and trained and trained before his first audition and before his second audition. So there was a very strong sense that everybody who got it because they deserved it, because they could sing. Also because they're great actors. And that's the other thing. If you want to cast somebody in a movie, it's no good casting somebody with a golden voice, because the camera's going to be right here, and you're going to have to believe them. And movie actors act in a different way from stage actors. So it was Tom who made all those decisions. In the end, I think they were completely brilliant decisions. I have suffered myself from films I've been involved in where the casting has been screwed up, and if you screw up the casting, your film is dead in the water. however good everything else is. So for a director to get each one of those parts right, which I personally believe he did, I think is pretty astonishing.
Hadley, there must have been huge fascination within your world, the world of the stage musical, as to who was going to take these roles. I mean, did everyone have an open mind? Was there any eye rolling when names were mentioned?
No, I don't think so. I think to a certain extent we're relatively aware of what Bill says. You know, that's the reality of that business, and to a certain extent that's now it's the same within the stage situation as well. You know, there's a reality these days about perhaps casting someone who's been in a particular TV talent contest or something like that, which perhaps sometimes is at the detriment of the thing itself. But I think. For those of us who were involved in the stage show at the time, we were actually quite astonished to the extent that these big names were so committed to telling this story and to being proper singers. You know, I think Hugh Jackman sort of was continuously warming up on set because he never wanted to let that part of his instrument go. I've done a couple of movies before, and I've never felt a feeling like this on set of... It felt like a stage show in terms of the camaraderie between people. And I think that's possibly because it was a totally different situation, i.e. everybody had to sing. And so I think most people within the stage community were very sort of... were much like fans, you know. Oh, I'd quite like to see him doing that or her doing that, you know.
No. Thank you. This will have to be our final question because we're going to bring things to a close. So if I can come down here for that question, please.
Sorry. Ironically, my question is quite similar. I guess I totally understand that it's really commercial now, and you know, only recently Bond was sold out to Heineken, so I understand that's a decision that has to be made. But talking about the beauty and the power of the story in the show being that the characters are the everyman, and you can kind of tie them into things that are going on at the moment. Do you feel that having superstar celebrities detracted from that a bit? Because, you know, actually it's a celebrity and maybe not the everyman. And also, equally, did you feel a bit of disappointment that actually the show and the novel and the legacy of those weren't enough to draw the crowds in and they felt they needed to have big blockbuster stars there?
It's a tough question because you are the writer of the film.
I'll just say very quickly, of course it was a risk. As it happens, I don't know what... Have you seen the film yet? Okay. Well, my own feeling is, if you take Hugh Jackman, if you take Anne Hathaway, they so sink themselves into those parts. I'm not sitting there thinking Wolverine. I'm not sitting there thinking The Devil Wears Prada at all. I'm in their assumption of that role, which is, I think, a great triumph. As for the sadness that the great audiences won't rush to a film with the name Victor Hugo over the titles, I'm afraid that's just how it is. They won't rush to Shakespeare over the titles either. Because with a movie, if you're spending 70 million, 80 million on it, it's not good enough to have 100,000 people see it in a theatre in London. You've got to have millions of people see it, millions, to get your money back. So, I'm just grateful that they're willing to spend the money, frankly, and if that's what they need to get people in, all power to them.
Could I just follow up with, with the casting of this film? I think, again, with somebody like Anne Hathaway, the research that this actress did into prostitution in the 19th century, also into the traffic of women in today's society, I think the commitment these actors gave to the story, again, that personal connection they had, translated into these performances. So we do need to be careful not to assume because there's a big name celebrity attached to a project, therefore it's purely commercial. And this, again, is one of the reasons that adaptation as an area of study is sometimes denigrated, because people see it as just copying and trying to get in for a quick buck. And I think this film is a perfect example of how it needn't be anything of the sort. And yet you can, like Hugo, still tick that commercial box. You can still rake the money in, but it doesn't mean you've dirtied your hands or sold out in any way.
Thank you. I'm going to have to bring things to a close now. All three of you, William Nicholson, Hadley Fraser and Bradley Stevens, have been incredibly generous with your ideas and your experience with this huge subject, with book, film, stage musical, and the entire history of the adaptations of the book. Thank you. I hope everybody out there will take something interesting away from it. Thank you. I'd like to thank thank the Ciné Lumière as well for having us here. Thank the Society of the Friends of Victor Hugo as well. Bradley Stevens, I think you've got a couple of words you'd like to say to finish the event as well.
Just some of you may know that Andrea Beaton, who's the Secretary and Vice President for the Society of Friends of Victor Hugo, has been doing an awful lot of work to organise these events to launch the festival this year. So last week there was an event run at one of the soup kitchens in London to really spread the humanitarian spirit of Les Misérables, and it's Andrea's tireless energy that's brought this event together this evening. So I think the Society have a generous gift that they'd like to present to her, and if we could please give her a round of applause for the work that she's put in.
Thank you very much. I second Bradley's thank you as well. Once again, thank you to the panellists and thank you for being here this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you.